available, so I'm going to get started. So like I say, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Maximising ROI through Data-Driven Hospitality Design. My name is Paul Boldy. I'm a director at Pragma and Benoit, and the Global Head of Hospitality Futures for the group. Today's webinar, we're focusing on a subject very close to my heart, and that is ROI and data-driven design. We want to take a deep dive into all things data and metric aligned to delivering an ROI for hotel projects, both new build and renovation, and we'll touch on renovation at the end. And importantly for this discussion, I think what drives the budget definition to be able to deliver an ROI for hotel assets. You know, it really never fails to surprise me, some of the decisions taken in isolation, without recognizing the impact and the synergy between the many metrics and the part that they all play, in the complex nature of hotel assets and hotel asset management. So I'm hoping that we can offer you a glimpse into the potential of a data-driven approach, especially to maximising ROI, while we embrace a new guest value proposition, because we can't ignore that. Obviously, there are changes in the market and changes to the way that people live, work, travel, and how they relax, and the part really that hotels play within this sort of ecosystem. So we're going to look at some of the ways that we're addressing sustainability in hotel design, and of course the impact of AI on our industry. This is really a focus on what it means for the potential of sort of personalized guest experiences and experiential travel. We've seen the impact of revenge travel, post-COVID, which seemed to result in revenge against tourism of late. And therefore, I think it shows how important the role of hospitality is in both community engagement and an aim towards net positive and regenerative tourism, and experiential journeys. So housekeeping, the session will be recorded, as I mentioned at the beginning, and we'll post it on YouTube so that you can watch at your leisure if you so wish. We'll also make the slides available. If you want to contact myself or Mike Goldman, who sent you this invitation after the session. So I'm pleased to say that joining me today is John Grant. John is a very experienced interior designer, and he leads the EMEA interiors and graphics team for Benoit. ID obviously been a very integral part of delivering great hospitality experience. I'm speaking to you today from our Dubai office, where I'm based. So I may take this opportunity to say Ramadan Mubarak for those who are celebrating the holy month. And John is in our London studio. Morning, John.
Morning, Paul, and morning, everybody. Thanks for this. I think it's going to be a really interesting chat. I've been working on hospitality projects for about 22 years now. I was overseas for a long time, so my experience covers China, Southeast Asia, UK, and the US. And I think the discussion today and the blend between Pragma and Benoit and Paul's expertise and what our interior graphics expertise brings is a unique proposition to the market. I think that's really interesting. It's also new to me because I've always been focused just on interior design projects. So I think what comes out of this is kind of new, interesting ways to attack, create briefs, and provide this kind of more firm data across the design project. So I think there's some really interesting things happening within the company, exciting times, and obviously we've got a lot of different projects on the drawing board at the moment that we can talk about and take people through today. So hope everyone finds it interesting.
Yeah, it was about 15,000 keys the last time I tried to look into the current and future workload. So yeah, as John mentioned, look, I think the format will hopefully be interesting. John and I are going to chat through today's topics. So we have about 30 minutes to run through the topics, and then with some time at the end for Q&A. So there should be a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to send over your questions, and John and I will do our best to answer them. If we don't get a chance to answer them today, we can always reach out to you after the session. John touched on it slightly, but just a bit of a short introduction in terms of who we are. Pragma plus Benoit, we turn data-driven insights into strategic and delivery strategies for high-performing, high-functioning assets across airports, retail, mixed-use developments, commercial, and obviously hospitality. We believe that it delivers real ROI for owners, developers, and operators alike. So today we're going to focus on our hospitality sector expertise and especially obviously to deliver ROI. We believe, and again, John touched on it a little bit, we've got a unique offering with our capabilities with Pragma and Benoit. We work together often to deliver turnkey services, market leading viability, advisory market study with Pragma, all the way through centers of excellence in master planning, architecture, landscape, interior design, and branding with Benoit. So I think this aligned approach, it's a blend of data and design, as you can see on the presentation, and it allows us to ensure that highest and best use of revenue generating space and asset optimization throughout the entire process. You may have seen over the past month that we've had a focus on hospitality with our Pragmatist publication. Now, this is a weekly insight into commercial trends across various sector expertises. If you're not already done so, I would encourage you to sign up. You can do this through our website at pragmagroup.com, or again, reach out in the Q&A tab and we'll make sure you get signed up. So for next week's Pragmatist, we're also going to try and publish a summary of this webinar, and there's also a white paper that we've published that brings the individual elements together. So those 4 articles that we published, and the ones that we're going to talk about today, space exploration, which is the movement towards more flexible hospitality space, full circle, a look at the importance of sustainability, personal space, hyper-personalization and AI within hospitality environment now, and then renew and refresh, the importance of data in renovation to deliver budget and ROI for hotel renovations. So maybe we'll dive straight in, because as John knows, I can talk for days on hotel data, and we need to hit the time. So space exploration. So I wanted to start off with this slide because I think this really highlights the impact of great strategy and alignment of metrics at the start of the development process. When we talk about data-driven design, we're really talking about the use of the many data points or metrics to make informed decisions. And this is about delivering, successful viability assessment or successful design that will deliver a successful project. I mean, one thing for sure, that, the cost of delay is the biggest unaccounted for cost in any project. And you can see on here, we often refer to value engineering, which has nothing to do with value and nothing to do with engineering, but it seems to be a default to market pressure, particularly in terms of budget. When we look at the cost of delay, especially within hospitality, we're talking about lost revenue and even lost reputation. So I always like to think of it, imagine a world where we can reduce cost, we can build less GFA, but we can increase revenues, so we have a higher return per square meter. If I was to use our elevator pitch, in less than 2 minutes, we can save you months of value engineering. And really, this data-driven design within hotels is one way of really validating this process. It's aligning revenue generation with investment, with budget, and with phasing. But let's dive into the topic. So, as we said, the first one was around space exploration. There's a few slides that you'll see with some takeaways in here, which are basically takeaways from the white papers and the Pragmatist articles that we did. Again, if you want a copy of the presentation, you can read these in a little bit more detail. But look, this is really about dynamic and multifunctional environments. There's hotels are increasingly embracing adaptable space planning. The ability to configure space to suit work, leisure, and social interactions. And this can deliver on a number of fronts, not least being the potential to activate more revenue generating space, aligned to operational efficiency, and ultimately, in part of the topics that we're talking about, a different personal guest experience. So there's a real need for hotels now to be more than just a place to eat and sleep and eat breakfast, basically. The work-life balance, the work from anywhere means that it's a real opportunity for hotels to sit at the center of communities. And I think this is the big movement that we're seeing within this. Obviously, the challenge is that how operators and hotels can leverage this new way of operating to be able to benefit from revenue, better revenue management, better operational control, and ultimately to be able to give the guest what they currently desire. So data-driven planning perspective, we've certainly seen that move towards better activation of space to increase revenue potential, and this is where we tie in with the return on investment. where we can deliver higher revenue per square meter, for example, is a good measure of that. So as hotels shift towards a more dynamic and multifunctional environments, we're definitely seeing that adaptation of hotel space. So space exploration was the title of our first pragmatist back at the beginning of February. So how's your knowledge of space, John?
My knowledge is quite good, Paul. Yeah, I'd hope. Yeah. I think when we touch on space exploration, we're working on various branded hotels, and they're either urban hotels, resort style hotels, or leisure development hotels, which are in, even ones in and surrounding theme park environments, which is a big driver at the moment. The important aspect we're seeing is how to incorporate a brand or create a brand, but keep the flexibility at the same time. So we've got lobbies, as social hubs, as restaurants, as adaptive layouts. There's a big drive on the F&B adaptability and how to keep the flexibility within there. But then there's also sub-brands within brands. So the consistency in the brand message is something that we're trying to work hard with the clients at the moment. And then the layer of flexibility on top of that, there's a big drive of kind of not allowing too much repurposing later with flexibility, which is a contradiction in its own right. But these are the challenges being set out to us as designers at the moment. But Cyro on screen at the moment is a very interesting brand that we're working with, and their approach about health and well-being, the overdriving aspect of this, but that is informing how this space is planned and how we explore the various spaces within this hotel. So a lot of the different brands are kind of driving us in a different route to plan the hotels, the external, internal, the connectivity to the external areas as well is bigger than it has been before, I feel. And the brands opening themselves up to the external presences, whereas before I think it was much more of a controlled, coming in, checking in, whereas now it's a bit more of an open door, and that has its issues. But it's increasing footfall at the kind of what, let's call them slower times or off-peak times. So this has all been factored in, and that's kind of coming through the briefs that you're creating, Paul.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I picked out a couple of examples here that, the Hoxton, Ennismore's Hoxton and what Marriott are doing with Moxie. I mean, these are great examples. I was in the Shoreditch property a couple of weeks ago, and you saw the activation in that lobby. It's the reception, it's co-working, it's the bar, it's the dining area. It's a really, really active space now. And I guess, some of the challenges, I guess, from an ID point of view are, there's obviously brand elements here, but just making sure that the furniture and the layouts are adaptable and materiality is right, because obviously you're encouraging greater usage of that space, and therefore we need to obviously look at functionality and wear and things like that. And then that for me, the example that's shown on screen here with this Moxie in New York, it goes back to what I said earlier about doing more with less space. If you look at what they try to achieve here with the modularity of furniture, you want a dining table, it's there. If you want to you want to work or rest or play, it adapts to that space, but it's in a lot more confined space. So we can definitely prove that we can do more with smaller space. So definitely. I mean, one of the areas that we're seeing, and one of the drivers for this, I think, is what the guest data says in terms of how we plan this space. From demand analysis to guest demographics. If people want more social space, they don't want to be in the room, they want to be in social space, or they want more private space and they want to use that room for for working and just being able to sort of concentrate on things. So I think hotels can use a lot of the guest data, and you'll see a theme throughout this conversation that we tend to go back to a lot of data in guest reviews, and it's possibly something that a lot of design firms and don't necessarily look at. But it's one of the big things for me that I think has been a takeaway over the years, that there's no point in addressing a problem that doesn't exist, and not addressing the problems that do exist. So when we look at guest data, when we look at how we incorporate co-working spaces, we make sure that we've got cafe style areas or charging stations and things like that, because and while these the guest data applies to more to existing operating assets, we've also got to think about how we develop new assets. And there's a lot of market data out there in terms of hotels competitive set, in terms of guest reviews and what happens, and so that we can take cognizance of that to be able to sort of look at what needs to be done from both from a space planning point of view, but as you touched on, John, what that means when it's translated into good interior design that makes people feel that space is working for them. Definitely.
And I think, Paul, to add, if you go back to maximising ROI, the important thing for everybody is to make sure the guests come back and they're comfortable. And so a lot of the things that we talk about are the hidden gems in here, such as if we're creating flexible space, is temperature control and acoustics, which I do feel are often the challenges and overlooked, and more time needs to be spent to make sure we do incorporate those as early as possible, so these spaces are comfortable. Because a lot of the guest feedback is always great, beautiful open space, but I couldn't talk to my friend in this area or this area. So we really have to kind of we have to kind of look and develop those as early as possible through space exploration. It's those hidden elements that we need to think about.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when you can create great food and beverage concepts, you can create great wow moments, and everybody's looking for that sort of Instagrammable element. But if the lighting's not right and it's not conducive to, say, taking a photograph with your phone, or the noise level is not as conducive to conversation, and we know we want to create sort of vibrant spaces for interaction. I mean, if you think where we were, during COVID and just post COVID, it was all about separation and barriers, and now it's really what we've seen coming out of the back of that is more integration, more communication, more getting together of space. So I think this is one of the primary drivers of what we're seeing, especially in hotel public areas. You sit there in the morning, maybe have your breakfast, you'll have a meeting, you'll work, and then maybe towards the evening the place starts to get a little bit livelier. There's a lot of hotels that were successful in this, in integrating communities, are with art pop-up exhibitions and maybe food programs and things that engage not only with the hotel guests but with the wider community. I mean, long gone are the days where a hotel financial analysis would be based on the occupancy alone. Now we've got to look at what happens outside the guest room. We've got to look at activation within the space. All day diners we've seen, and it was one of the sort of primary drivers for doing more with less space, is that underutilized all day dining spaces. Now we can use them for so much more. We can reduce that GFA. Reducing that GFA of food and beverage space reduces the kitchen, reduces the storage, reduces the loading dock. It has a big impact on the overall space planning of these assets. So,
and Paul, Paul, do you find the data-driven design and the feedback you're getting improves guest satisfaction and the revenue generation in hotels, all those aspects that you're talking about?
No, I think it does. I mean, look, fewer complaints lead to better ratings, and they drive higher bookings and more direct revenue. So I think there's obviously, and all right, I appreciate these are things sort of after the event, but there are things that we can control when we're designing a project. I think one of the other aspects that I think is different in our approach is that, when we're designing a space, especially hospitality space, we're thinking about revenue. We could change the orientation of a guest room to drive higher ADRs, for example. Without a doubt, and we can position assets and facilities, within those spaces with a view on how we would drive revenue for the operator, developer, investor, whoever it may be. So certainly, just conscious of time, let's maybe move on to onto the next one, which is something that's close to everybody's heart at the minute, is sustainability. You know, it used to be a sort of added element in hotel design. Hotels are a big user of energy and you know, a big consumer. So I think now it's becoming more a business imperative than it was. I mean, circular economies, you know, the principles within hotels to deliver enhanced brand reputation, deliver cost efficiencies, and responsible resource management are obviously critical to what we do. And I think they're redefining how we design and construct hotels. I mean, we're embracing, you know, LEED, BREEAM, EDGE within our master planning, architecture, and ID teams. But you know, there are internal circular economies that you know, we can definitely see. We can definitely see the benefits of a circular economy and a you know, a view towards sustainability, certainly. I mean, there's you know, I guess there's many ways that we can deal with that. And we were seeing, you know, from an internal environment, we've seen a shift to, you know, refillable amenities and bulk dispensers, and you know, reduction in plastic. You know, it's become commonplace. You know, less common, I guess. You know, food waste reduction, inventory tracking. You know, upcycling leftovers and partnership with food banks. We've seen, you know, textile and FF&E recycling, which are lesser well used, but you know, anything you can do to repurpose linens, mattress, and furniture instead of landfilling is obviously a benefit. And as I touched on at the beginning of this, you know, hotels are a big user of energy, and we're seeing you know, a lot of better close control through building management systems, BMS, and smart control. We've also seen over the last few years the emergence of ESCOs, energy service companies, that will come into existing. I mean, it's more applicable to the sort of refit and renovation market, but they can come in and change the control to be able to make energy savings, and they get paid through the energy savings. So again, from an owner and operator point of view, it's less capex, certainly. I think, look, one of the areas that we talked about, and we touched on in our white paper on this, was, you know, modularization. It's something that we've, you know, I worked in the UK probably 30 odd years back, and we were doing modular hotels for Trust House Forte at the time. When they did hotel extension, we did this, and we saw the benefit of it. It's something that is starting to gain traction again. And I think, you know, other than, you know, modular bathroom pods and things like that, which we've seen, you know, is quite commonplace now. Modularization is becoming something that is contributing to sustainability. I mean, how would you see that contributing, John, in your experience?
Yeah, well, I think you know, this circular economy and with modularization is really, really important. The example on screen, Mercedes motorhomes, is a full modular concept. This has to be stacked on a truck. The brief to us was this travels around Europe, and they have to reduce the modularization to reduce carbon footprint, but increase the modules to create more space. So again, challenging brief. It gets assembled in 4 days at track, and then it gets taken down in 1 day and driven off on a truck. So incredible project. And you know, the reason I put this in as an example, really, it's a hospitality suite. It's different people going here across different levels. But again, it was all about recycling, reusing, and modularization. We worked with a lighting company here that reused lighting. They go around the country taking lights from construction sites, repurposing them. So the drive for reuse, sustainability is a big emphasis, especially on a F1 motor sport team, who are obviously, you'd think, are not so carbon friendly because they're traveling around the world all the time, but they are pushing heavily on reducing.
Yeah. What innovative sort of materiality in this? I mean, maybe it wasn't applicable in this, but I mean, I pulled up an image of Changi Airport there. We've done a lot of work at Changi, and obviously, you know, they're pushing the sort of biophilic design and you know, the outside in environment. But where else are you seeing that sort of move to new sustainable materiality in certainly in interior design?
Well, I mean, like a lot of clients are talking about it, but then we're working with companies, for example, who are taking waste from construction sites and they're kind of turning them into tabletops and artwork. And so there's a big drive on that. It's really interesting what's happening, but it's still, there's it's small components. Then you go for the larger companies who are producing interesting furniture with recycled materials, waste materials. So all the designers in house are all kind of going through these challenges, and our briefs to them and the clients' briefs are to try to be as sustainable as possible, and the drive for sustainability is there. I don't think it's as visible to a client or a customer all the way through the process, and I think we have to get better at that. A lot of the VE is sustainability still, and we have to, I think, be stronger getting them implemented all the way through. Again, it's the hidden stuff, Paul, we talked about earlier on, where I think there's a bigger uptake, MEP, lighting. So the hidden elements is, I think there's a bit better awareness about that right now. The kind of surface of interior design it's not so visible, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think I'm contradicting myself all the time here, but that's what's happening.
No, well, it's a difficult subject. Everybody's, I guess, been guilty of the checklist, especially with initiatives like LEED and BREEAM. It's at the end of the day, it's a checklist. But I think the great thing in hospitality is a lot of hotel operators, especially the big international brands, they're looking at Green Key and EarthCheck and all the other initiatives that really put sustainability at the front and center. And I think there's a real move towards transparency in that that carbon footprint and that carbon offset and what they're doing. And I touched on it right at the beginning of the session. We always try and think, well, can we get to net zero with hotels, instead of thinking, well, actually, why are we not net positive? Why are we not doing something? And instead of sustainable tourism, it's regenerative tourism. It's giving something back. And I think the more that we position hotels and assets within the communities that they give back to community, it's not I always find things like cruise ships for me are such a negative impact on all the money, all the transactions stay on the ship, and then the tourists go and they walk through and they take a photograph and then they're back spending the money on the ship rather than engaging with communities. But that's a whole other topic. Again, just conscious of time, so maybe we'll move on to our third one, which I think is a really interesting one. It's a really poignant one at the minute with the use of AI and data analytics and everything we're doing. And I think what COVID did for the hospitality industry was really leverage some of the initiatives that we were trying to push all along. We've seen that in the space planning, we've seen it in experiential, but use of data analytics to try and enable hyper personalization at scale now, and especially within sort of revenue management opportunities, I think is a real game changer. It really extends beyond simply service. It focuses on creating spaces that adapt, to enhance comfort, convenience, and that connection part that we've talked about. So I think it's a really nice aspect to the things that we've talked about in terms of the space, and sustainability, because again, it's playing to that value, the value proposition. Guests are more interested in the full plate cost of their meal rather than where the food comes from and so on. And I think the hyper personalization within the industry is really playing with that. I mean, how are you seeing sort of hyper personalization transferring guest experiences today within your sort of ID?
Yeah. I mean, it's a big word, Paul, and yeah, it's an interesting topic. What we're looking at mostly is customized content and offers. So how with hyper personalization is it's like we want the brand or the business can deliver specific content to the guest through interior design, and culture is also a strong driver for the ID. So on screen here, obviously, is project in Jeddah. They wanted really kind of customization of the kind of culture through the offer in the hotel, small touches, decorative touches, and that fed into rooms through the F&B offer as well. But again, the AI drive within kind of creating that was an also interesting avenue to go through. But that's kind of really early stages. I think the big thing is that how does that content get delivered to the guest on the guest journey from getting out of the car or getting from public transport or getting dropped off? You know, what's the attachment there through that personalization? And that's kind of where we have to really think about the detail. So the service combined with guest experience and interior design, if you link those three, then you get that kind of real strong hyper personalization.
Yeah, I guess with AI we can also link in sort of IoT, because there's a big push with technology. Obviously, you can't talk about AI without talking about technology integration. And I think, we touched on the Cyro brand earlier. Lighting control and being able to adjust your environment to circadian rhythms for better sleep and waking, temperature control, but also that guest service element of this. Ease of interaction, be it concierge service or it's in-room dining. There's a big push for real connectivity and personalization of that experience. I think another one for me, and I think this is a really telling scenario. There are the capability now where a guest walks on a property, they're connected instantly to the network. The hotel knows they're a loyalty member. They have their room key on their device and they bypass all interaction, and they can, and that, some guests like that. There are other cases where, actually data analytics can be used to greet the guest, to create that loyalty and relationship. And, preference on stay data can be used to sort of shape this approach. And then there's another element that is, a certain level of luxury and service where, maybe that particular guest doesn't want to download an app, and they don't want to be, asked a dozen questions. So that, I mean, my real hope with this is that we never really take the hospitality out of hospitality, because hospitality is about that interaction. There are times when you just want to get to your room and it's midnight, you've got off a long flight, and you want to do that. But equally, there are times when you want to be greeted and service. So I think there's always going to be a really fine balance between what hyper personalization means for particular guests. And while we can't integrate every preference there, I think there is, and I'll go back to that sort of looking at where the data comes from, looking at the sentiment, looking at NPS, Net Promoter Score, and guest sentiment analysis. The whole reason why hotels send you that survey after you've been is because, one, they want to try and improve their score, but they also want to learn what works for you. And I think more than ever we'll see this playing a real strong part. I mean, there is obviously important discussions around data protection and security, and I think definitely there has to be, from an operational point of view, there has to be an element of, I want to take part or I don't want to take part. And I think that's the balance that we obviously need to find with hyper personalization. But you're right, it's a big topic, it's a complex topic, but I think it's one that we, working within the hospitality environment, we cannot ignore that, because it really is shaping some of the strategies that we have for both new build and renovation. And talking of renovation, I want to move on to the final topic, because again, I'm really conscious of time and we're probably talking a little bit too much. We've talked about the right approach, how it can impact flexibility and longevity of hotel assets, sustainability and materiality. But there's obviously a huge market to carry out these approaches. How would you apply this to an existing asset, whether it's underperforming, whether it's in need of repositioning or rebranding, whether it's affiliation with a particular brand or the distribution channels for how they sell and market the hotel. A data-driven approach to this methodology, it considers this wider impact operationally as well as sort of guest sentiment feedback. So for me, a well-planned and executed project, especially a renovation project, it's about enhancing the guest experience, but it should also deliver a strong ROI. When we talk about hotel renovations, there seems to be so much focus on the ID, and forgive me, John, but it's ID and budget, and it's what you think it's going to cost you without really appreciating the overall metrics for success. And I think, some of these metrics for success ultimately will be guest satisfaction, sentiment analysis, and more efficient operation for the operator, and therefore greater return on investment. And again, we've pulled out some of the key issues here. I put this slide in because I think it sort of pulled together a little bit of what we talked about in terms of space planning. I mean, this is an extract from a property improvement plan, or a PIP, where we're taking a poorly designed and underutilized all-day dining area. We're changing the concept to add a lounge, bar, restaurant, and this was actually going to be outsourced. Hence, we'd added a pool. So there was a little bit of capex involved here, but potentially this was really going to work. We moved the all-day diner to a lobby space, which was underutilized at the time. So we're making better use of that public area. So we created two revenue generating assets from one. I mean, PIPs, obviously, there's a wider environment that we need to consider, plant and equipment, and most importantly, fire and life safety, FLS. If we change a concept, it's important to ensure that we don't overstep occupancy loading, so we impact means of escape. So there's a really, and the reason I'm saying this is because there's a really considered approach around how we look at highest and best use aligned to potential for revenue generating spaces. Definitely. Any thoughts, John?
Yeah, I think, well, when it comes to refurbs, they're obviously a much more complicated asset to work with than a new build. And what we really like to do, and I think that's where your data comes in, it's more important than ever, is to understand what do you really want to do with this asset, because manipulating assets is expensive, and we need to make sure that investment is worthwhile. And from an ID perspective, and without putting it as a disservice, because it's what I do, but we can create anything to look really good, but it has to function properly and it has to flow properly. And that's what we have to kind of resolve. And we should spend more time resolving the functional aspects and also the budget requirements and drivers behind it before even getting to the interior design, and then adding that layer on top of it. So yeah, I think that's really, really important, because some of these older assets are really kind of heavily built and not easy to kind of turn around. So it's having the kind of mix of consultancy that can provide the right level of expertise at the start.
I have a bit of a mantra where hotel renovations are concerned, and that is, if a guest room takes longer to clean post renovation, one of two things happens. It doesn't get cleaned, and therefore the asset depreciates faster, or it does get cleaned and then the operator incurs additional cost. So this is, I think, to your point, we've got to think about materiality, we've got to think about access, we've got to think about how this impacts the overall operation. And again, it's this mindset to be able to think about the operation and the revenue and everything else, rather than just, well, this is a great design. And I get, we've been involved in so many renovation projects where the guests complain about the water pressure and the air conditioning, but they're never addressed because, well, we've got to install the latest coffee machine and the latest bed experience and so on and so forth. And I'm glad you touched on budget there, because budget for me is one of the most discussed topics in any renovation without really understanding the metrics. And this is where I could, again, I'm conscious of time, I can talk for days on this, but there's three sets of metrics that impact the budget quite simply. The operating metrics, which are current and future projected, the investment metrics, which are about the investor's tolerance for risk and what the returns that they want, and then the phasing. They all impact how we look at budget potential. Changing any of them impacts the budget. I mean, the other important aspect is to be able to define the scope and define a clear strategy that will deliver on those revenues, and therefore deliver on the ROI. If we, in all honesty, we could deliver return on investment by improving the operational efficiency without any capex. involvement. You could look at the operational efficiency of maybe of changing some way of working, or changing some space. I mean, these things, you just can't overlook these when we're looking at, renovation strategies. The other aspect of thinking about how we could make space more efficient when we're looking at renovations is that you have the additional benefit of adding to the asset value. I mean, especially if you look at it through a discounted cash flow lens, through GOP and cap rate, you're adding money to the asset, the overall asset value, which is obviously very important from an asset management point of view. So there are so many facets to a hotel renovation, aside from, well, we need to have a better look and feel within the guest rooms, or the public areas. So yeah, it's quite an interesting topic. I think without a well-defined scope, without looking at cost and everything else, you end up with scope creep, you end up with delays, and you fail to prioritize needs versus wants. I think that is the other aspect. So yeah, definitely. Again, I'm going to say it again, but conscious of time. If you have any questions, please just drop them in the Q&A, and we're just going to get around to that now. Final word from you, John, on this.
Well, no, I think all these topics are really interesting. It'd be interesting to hear people online, what they're looking at, seeing, doing, hearing in the market. We're absorbed in our projects, and there's a lot of interesting new things happening that we've talked about. But it'd be interesting to hear what people do have to say, and if there's anything we've not touched on, because yeah, we can talk forever about all this stuff. And once you're rolling on a project from stage to stage, some of this stuff does, it's either done and it's moved on, and just refreshing yourself and talking through it again I find it quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, and look, for me, it's a methodology and a mindset to be able to approach hospitality assets. We're very rich in data. We're very rich in, in metrics that we can use to inform. And I think this for me is the biggest takeaway, that the better informed we are, the better aligned we are as stakeholders within the process. I think the better we'll deliver more high operating, high efficient assets, really. Okay, so just as you know, John and I could probably talk for days on this, but again, just to recap, look, we're leveraging data analytics. We've seen that we can design hotel spaces that meet current demand. They adapt to future trends. They adapt to guest behavior. We're looking at increasing lifespan. We're looking at reducing the need for future renovation effectively. So it's about integrating data-driven design, sustainability, AI, obviously hyper-personalization. But I think by embracing this methodology and holistic approach to innovation, I think we can ensure long-term success, and we can really place hospitality assets at the center of communities to really, bring life and energy and everything. That's the one thing in hospitality. There's something addictive that gets under your skin, and it is that energy that you feel. So it's really important, I think. So let me just see. There's a couple of questions.
There are some questions coming through. Shall I
Yeah.
read them to you, and you can see
Go
which
on
one?
then. Yeah.
I'll go from top to bottom. And could you explain with a case study, Changi Airport brackets, how data-driven design strategy improved hospitality experiences? I mean, we don't need to touch on Changi, but we've talked about Cyro, Paul, and the kind of the look you had on that when we first got that through planning wise, and the reshaping of that. That's a
Yeah.
good example, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I'll just touch on the Changi one, because I think there is, within Pragma, it's not just about hospitality expertise. We've retail and airports, and we're doing work in a lot of airports. So again, it's a very similar analysis. It's about heat maps, it's about footfall, it's about demographics and spend profiles and things like that. So when and look, we weren't involved in the overall design of Changi. We did certain areas within that project. But there are drivers towards what it's a major hub, how guests and passengers interact with the space, how you provide some respite from the sort of the daily grind of that. So I think that there is some relevant there. I think, yeah, you touched on Cyro. Cyro is a wellness and recovery brand. There's a very specific drive there to position them in that market. So it's a very specific demographic, and when we're looking at the projects with them and with their teams, this is, we're trying to get in. Not only are we trying to position the property in the right space, but we've got to then look at what that demographic is, what that, how that would feed into the property. Yeah.
And then the next question is, where does all this fit within luxury hospitality and low-cost hospitality? Are these processes applicable on both ends of the spectrum? I think your dashboard comes into play here, Paul.
No, look, it absolutely does, because you can take a poorly performing asset and you can turn it around. It doesn't matter whether that asset is at the low end of the market or the high end of the market. You could look at a poorly performing fine dining restaurant and you could turn it into a high performing fast casual. So I think it's less about the chain scale, less about the luxury scale. There are added elements of full service, select service, limited service hotels that have different drivers for cost and OPEX aligned to that, but that's all within the model anyway. So I think, yeah, to answer that question, it does apply to both ends of the spectrum, or all parts of the spectrum.
Okay, next question here, and you've got 2 minutes challenge here, 2 minutes to answer this one. I'm interested to hear more about how you are collecting and analyzing the data.
Okay, so there's the benefit of hospitality is we're very data rich. I mean, we have STR, we have Hopstats, we have NPS score, we have market penetration index, we have guest sentiment scores, we have TripAdvisor reviews. And there's software that hotel operators use, Review Pro and Medallion people and software like that. So there is an absolute sort of absolute wealth of data and analytics to be able to look at this. Sometimes it's really just looking at the comp set and the area and some basic elements of economy. When we're doing market study, we're looking at economy, we're looking at future supply and demand, we're looking at airlift, we're looking at access and what's happening in general. So I think for me it's a really considered view of all metrics and how they impact the overall design of the asset. Yeah.
Next question. While some lifestyle hotels are leaning towards having slimmer ADD areas, there is often the downside of having an inferior breakfast experience. Agree. What are some of the best practices in reusing designing traditional ADDs? I'll answer. I mean, again, one of the things we've been looking at is, even if they're small, how do you make them feel larger through a lighter area space? Can you bring natural light in there? We've been doing a lot of biophilic studies to kind of bring nature in, just to kind of lift a dark, gloomy space. And depending on country, obviously London, you have a lot of basement dining spaces which are harder to work with. But again, how do you kind of create a sense of enlargement within there through manipulation of space and kind of bringing natural elements into there as well, just to create a sense of airiness? I think that's one thing we'd look at.
No, absolutely. And I think to that point, that having a great breakfast experience is important. It's part of that whole journey and everything else. But there are ways that it can be done. We've seen before. We have a 200-seat all-day diner that when you work out the occupancy and the number of covers, you're running at 15-20% occupancy over the meal services. So the analysis would be to say, well, if we halve this, where are our pinch points? Where are our high traffic, high occupancy loading, and what do we do with that? Do we have lounge areas? Do we have lobby space that we can quickly convert? Do we have meeting space? And this is once you start to think about along these lines, that's when you start to think creatively about how adjacencies work within hotel space. The connectivity between meeting space, between all-day dining, between lobby and guest rooms, to be able to sort of flex in this space. So it's there's no one size fits all, I think. And obviously we're all about improving the guest experience and the guest journey, but I think sometimes that journey is a little bit different to what you expected it to be, which sometimes can be quite nice as well. So okay, look, again, I'm really conscious of people's time. Look, I'd just like to say thank you. Hope you enjoyed listening in and enjoyed it as much as John and I did. Please feel free to reach out. We can send you a copy of the slides. The webinar is going to be online as well, so you can listen back. But please, again, any questions that we didn't manage to get around to answer, we'll try and get those answered as well. So thank you very much. It's been a great session, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.